I'm not going to say where we live. I'm not going to use our real names. All of this happened. If any of it sounds familiar or if it's happening to someone in your life, go to the doctor. Don't wait. People have already died, and we're not being told. This is how it started for us. You haven't noticed how distant you've been the last couple of days? No. I have no idea why. I feel fine. My husband promised me and the kids that he would do better. I thought maybe it was because he was about to turn 40. We had just gotten back from our trip to Disney World, and as far as he was concerned, everything was great. He ran a small fever for a couple of days after we got home, and it took a while for his ears to pop from the plane. Other than that, everything seemed normal. I felt guilty for having to say something about him being distant. I had to. It was completely out of his character. A week went by. He was complaining that he felt like crap all the time, but he had no idea why. He was sweating. I made him go to the doctor, and they said that he had a sinus infection. There is lots of mucus in his sinuses and excessive buildup in his ears. They gave him some antibiotics and sent him home. He woke up one night in a cold sweat. He told me his fingernails were burning. There was something underneath them. I had never heard that before. He took a couple of aspirin and tried to go back to sleep. He didn't. A few days went by and he had not slept at all. His mood was worse. He kept flexing his fingers. They were constantly moving. I looked things up on the internet to see if someone else had ever had the same issue. Nothing. One night I woke up and he wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, soaking his hands in the sink. The water was pouring out of the faucet and steam was fogging the kitchen window. He had a box of Epsom salts right next to him on the counter. "George, what are you doing?" "Oh, nothing. Go back to bed, baby. I'll be right there." "What's going on?" "Nothing." I walked into the kitchen, and I could tell that he was trying to hide whatever was in the sink from me. When I got closer, I could see that the water in the sink had a pink hue. I turned my head. There was a pair of needle-nosed pliers on the kitchen island. "Oh my God, George." "I'm okay. Seriously, look at me. I'm okay. I know how this looks." He had removed every nail from every finger. "It looks crazy." "I know. I watched some videos on how to safely do it." "Are you insane? How do you safely do it?" There was just this little voice in my head that gave me the answer. I took a couple of pills after I was done. The pain is gone. I'm not running a fever. I feel great. I wanted him to see a doctor the next day, and he agreed. I should have insisted that I go along just to make sure he went, but I didn't. He never went to the doctor. He told me later that something told him not to. He slept like a baby for 2 days. He even called off a day from work. Other than the bandages on all of his fingers, he was himself again. I told him I wanted him to see a therapist. I was worried. The morning of the 3rd day, I found him in the garage. He was staring at the wall. He was speaking. It sounded like he was speaking backwards, but he wasn't. The words he was saying were in English, but they were all garbled up, a kind of verbal dyslexia. Word fragments that were smashed together at random. That's the only way I can describe it. When I walked over and shook him, he immediately snapped out of it like nothing was wrong at all. Just sleepwalking, I think. I think I was dreaming that I was having a conversation myself. He laughed it off, got dressed, and then went to work. He came home 5 hours later. He had threatened to kill a coworker. They fired him. They didn't call the police because he agreed to leave. He had no explanation. He was as dumbfounded and terrified as I was. I don't even remember doing any of it. I barely remember coming home. What's going on with me? I don't know. We need to get you in to see someone. I was worried he had a brain tumor. I made him an appointment for the next morning. He began running a fever again in the early evening. I had my sister take the kids for the night. After I dropped them off, I ran to the store to pick up some medicine. When I got home, I could hear him inside crying. I opened the door, and the walls of the entryway had been broken and torn out in several places. He was crying in our bedroom at the back of the house. As I walked through, I could see that he had torn gaping holes in every wall. The bits of wall and the insulation inside had been yanked out and thrown all over the house. Bloody handprints were everywhere. I found him in our bedroom. He was naked and crumpled in the corner. A sledgehammer was on the floor next to him. His fingers were dripping. The bandages had fallen off. Holly, what the hell is wrong with me? He was covered in sweat and his own blood from his hands. He was burning up. Oh my God. Holly, something is wrong. You're burning up badly. There's something in the walls, baby. I can hear it. It won't stop talking to me. It's driving me crazy. You need an ambulance. I need an ambulance. I ran to the bathroom and started an ice-cold bath. I had no idea how long it would take for an ambulance to get there. We lived 20 miles from town. I called 911 while I dumped all of the ice from the freezer into the bath. There wasn't much, so I threw every bit of frozen food we had into the water as well. I went back into the room to help him up. His body was so slick, it was hard for me to get a grip on him. He was barely able to walk to the bathroom, and he slipped and fell into the tub. I heard a bone snap in his leg, but he didn't even react to it. It was the water he reacted to. Too cold. No, too cold. He was trying to get out of it. He was starting to speak in those jumbled words. He was begging me to help him out of the cold water. I tried to explain to him that he needed to cool down, and then he started convulsing. I didn't know what to do. I held his head above the water, and I tried to keep him from thrashing around and hurting himself. I could see that his leg was broken. It flopped around in the tub like a rubber snake. His head kept going underneath the water. I was struggling to keep his face above it. I could hear the ambulance coming outside, and he slowly stopped convulsing. I felt something warm spill onto my hand that was around his head. A large insect that looked like a millipede wriggled out of his ear and onto the top of my hand. I instinctively jerked away, and I saw the bug plop down into the water. I pulled him out of the tub. My only thought was to get him away from the thing. I couldn't get him out. I could only push the water next to it with my hand, sending it towards my husband's feet. I watched the insect writhe and convulse until, finally, it quit moving. What's going on? George? Why am I so tired? Help me. By the time we got to the emergency room, my husband's fever was gone. He was speaking normally. Other than his broken leg and his hands, he was fine. I scooped the insect out of the bathwater with a plastic bag, and I gave it to the doctor in the emergency room. I was surprised when he quickly stuck it in his coat pocket. He didn't ask me any questions about it. They wanted to keep George overnight for observation. They gave him a sedative that would finally knock him out. I fell asleep in the chair next to his bed. It was the middle of the night when a new doctor I had not seen before came back into the room. As my eyes focused, I saw that he had his finger over his closed lips and was carrying a few items. He squatted next to my chair and whispered, "I need to check something. Please be silent. Okay?" I nodded. He went over to my husband and moved his head to the right. He put some metal tools, a small bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a small plastic container on the bedside table, and then he shined a light down into my husband's ear. I watched him use a metal tool to scrape along the inside of George's ear. I heard a pop. He grabbed a pair of long tweezers and used them to pull out a tumor of some kind from George's ear, a moist sac about the size of a small grape. He plopped the tumor into the plastic cup, grabbed the bottle of rubbing alcohol, and then walked over to me. He squatted down, took one of his fingers, and pushed on the tumor until it popped. Inside of it were hundreds of tiny worms. They were crawling all over each other. I stared at them while he whispered, "Your husband is a very lucky man. I'm glad you got here when you did. This was about to hatch. Usually the mother stays until it does. The freezing water must have driven her out of her warm little nest. The little ones feed on her when they break out. They spread inside the host. It would have driven your husband completely mad, but not before the offspring would have spread to you and your children and any pets in your house." The doctor placed the plastic cup down on the floor and poured some of the rubbing alcohol into it. All of the small worms convulsed and then slowly stopped moving. The doctor looked back up at me. "What I'm about to tell you, I can't say out loud. There's too much money involved. Have you been to Florida, Alabama, or Mississippi lately? We just got back from Disney World a couple of weeks ago. Well, this is all I'm going to say. Your husband is going to be okay. Lots of doctors and coroners back east are having similar cases, and those that are speaking up are losing their credentials. Doctors will treat it, but it'll never be documented. Doctors will treat it, but it'll never acknowledge it. I'm not going to. No one is listening because they're paid not to. The people who caused this are trying to figure out how to fix it. They won't. It's going to get worse. When you have billionaires genetically modifying insects and introducing them into the wild, you're going to get mutations, not just from those insects, but from the normal insects that feed on them. Those mutations, which they insist are a myth right now, are starting to spread. Stay away from anyone who acts like your husband has." He got up and left. My husband's symptoms were attributed to a psychotic episode. I warned my close family and friends, but I felt like that wasn't enough. Try and stay safe. I started working for Glen Rock State Park 3 months ago. It was supposed to be an easy job. It's not some dangerous mountainous terrain filled with cougars and wolves, but a relatively flat expanse of deciduous forest. That's why I was surprised when, only a few days into the job, I got pulled out on a search and rescue mission. Again, this wasn't some dangerous terrain where lots of hikers went missing. I often saw young families with toddlers walking the mile-long trail to the waterfall. People would go for light jogs, have picnics and barbecues, and bring their little ones to play in the stream. The surrounding towns were safe, and the terrain was easy. The biggest threat we had was black bears, which, don't get me wrong, can be very dangerous, but still a far cry from cougars and cliffs and serial killers on the loose. Anyway, the missing person was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her name was Heather Ricks, and she'd taken the red trail with her dog, a 3-mile loop into the forest. Again, like all the trails, it was an easy hike. It shouldn't have caused any problems for her, assuming she had no underlying health conditions. But she didn't come home. Her boyfriend had called the police, worried sick about her. He'd quickly ruled out all the other possibilities. She wasn't the type to get up and leave. They'd had plans the next day. He hadn't heard from her by phone. No credit card activity. She disappeared without a trace. We began the search. 2 other park rangers came with me, Donnie, a young guy still working towards his degree, and Miranda, an older woman who'd been working here for years. We started off on the red trail together, scanning the woods for any sign of Heather. I knew we were in for a bad time when we found her dog. He was roaming around about a 1/4 of a mile off the trail, panting and exhausted. Donnie took him back to the ranger station to get him food and water. We searched the surrounding forest, kicking up leaves and scanning the bare trees, but there was no other sign of Heather. Miranda swore under her breath. Damn it, not another one. Another one? Do people go missing here often? We've had some bear attacks. 3 in the last year. On that morbid note, we continued deeper into the woods. Around the halfway point, Miranda and I split up. She headed south, while I headed north. "You got a compass, Mark?" she asked when we started off. No, I have my phone. Reception cuts out sometimes. She dug in her bag and pulled out a compass. I got a spare. I took it to be polite, but I didn't plan on using it. The park was only about a mile or two wide. Unless I found myself deep in a cave somewhere, I'd have reception at every point inside the park. We continued in our opposite directions. Eventually, I came to a stream. I followed it as I continued north, watching the black water roll over the rocks. The soft gurgling, splashing sound calmed me. It sounded just like those white noise machines that's supposed to help you fall asleep. I pulled my phone out just to check that I was going in the right direction. And that's where things started getting weird. When I opened Google Maps, the map didn't show a stream next to me. Generally speaking, the map schematic, whenever I'd used it, would show a little blue line where rivers and streams were, even if they were relatively small. I switched over to satellite view. Same thing. There was no cut or break in the sea of trees to show that a stream was there. It was just pure forest stretching out in every direction. I guess the trees are tall enough to hide it. I walked over to the stream. The black water lapped over the rocks, glistening in the light filtering through the waves above. My own reflection steered back at me, distorted by the rippling water. I dipped my fingers in. The water felt slightly warmer than it should be, not by much, but here in November, I'd expect it to feel ice cold. Instead, it was only cool. I shook my head and stood up. Then I continued further into the forest. "Heather!" I called out, scanning the trees. "Heather, can you hear me?" No reply. Just the birds chittering, the wind rustling the leaves. I lost sight of the stream as I continued north, and then, about 20 minutes later, I did find something of Heather's. My heart stopped when I saw it. A purple knitted hat lies on the forest floor. It was one of the items she'd been last seen with, according to her boyfriend. I had a whole list of things to look out for, things that might belong to her. I took a photo and texted Miranda and Donnie. When they didn't reply right away, I decided to head further into the forest. Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she needs my help. I continued forward, scanning the forest floor for her white puffer jacket and her pink sneakers. Anything that stood out against the mass of brown before me. And about 10 minutes later, I did see another flash of color. I ran towards it, heart pounding, and found her jacket on the ground. Except there was something wrong with it. Her jacket was laid out perfectly on the ground. It wasn't bunched up, twisted, or tangled, like you'd expect it to be if she'd gotten into a fight with an attacker. It was laid neatly across the leaves, without even a wrinkle. And it was zipped up. The cogs in my brain turned as I stared at it. That means someone zipped it up after it came off her. Unless she took it off on purpose. Zip it up and lay it there to pick it up later. But that didn't make a lick of sense. It had been between 30 and 40 degrees all week, even in the warmest parts of the day. Nobody would voluntarily take off their jacket and leave it in the forest. Which only meant one thing. Someone had left it here, on the ground, deliberately, for us to find. I lifted my gaze and scanned the trees, my heart pounding. The forest was silent now, too silent. I didn't hear the calls of birds or the rustling of leaves. It was just pure silence ringing in my ears. And then, ding. I jumped about a foot in the air as my phone made a texting sound. Hands shaking, I pulled it out of my pocket to see a text from Miranda. Go back to the ranger station immediately. As I glanced at the photo of the hat I'd sent her, I noticed it too had been laid perfectly across the ground. I quickly snapped a photo of the jacket and sent it over. I found her jacket, but it looks like it's been staged. 3 dots appeared, indicating Miranda was typing a reply. Then, "Get out of there now." Snap. The sound of a stick breaking. I glanced up and saw movement among the trees. I couldn't see anything between the crisscrossing trunks and overhanging leaves. Just a flash of shadow, a flash of movement. I broke into a sprint. A few minutes later, I pulled out my phone to make sure I was going the right way. It took me longer than I would have liked, but finally, I made it back to the trail. Even though my lungs were burning and my legs were aching, I forced myself to sprint back down the trail. I didn't let myself stop until I was at the Ranger Station Visitor Center at the front of the park, panting wildly. Then I slipped inside and collapsed into a chair. Miranda was on the phone with someone. She eyed me as I came in and then continued to the unknown caller. Yes, vacate immediately. Tell them it was another bear attack, and it isn't safe. A pause. Let me know when you're done. She hung the phone back up on the receiver and turned toward me. We're vacating the park. Can you set this up at the trailhead? She threw me a roll of yellow caution tape, then handed me a red sign that read closed. Okay. Donnie should be here any minute. When you see him, tell him to help you clear out the parking lot. Davis and Jackie are clearing out the trails, so they don't need any help there. I had a million questions, but I did as I was told. Donnie came back just as I was hanging up the sign, and the two of us cleared the parking lot. Less than an hour later, the park was empty. The gate was closed, and the five of us were holed up in the ranger station. Jackie, Davis, and Miranda seemed to know something we didn't. They talked in hushed tones in the back room with the door locked, which left Donnie and me sitting in the main room with nothing to do. She doesn't want us to leave, I said, tapping away at a stupid mobile game on my phone, which is dumb because we're not doing anything here. Still getting paid though, Donnie replied. Isn't that a good thing? Yeah, I guess. An awkward silence settled between us. Donnie was about 10 years younger than me, I think, and I wasn't sure what I had in common with some Gen Z teenagers. I racked my brain for something to talk about, but it came up empty. She didn't tell you what was going on, I asked again. He shook his head. There's no way it's bears. I think it's some serial killer on the loose, he said. But they don't put that on the news because they don't want people to panic. I mean, laying down her clothes all nicely like that, luring you out somewhere, that's serial killer behavior, for sure. Very helpful, Donnie, I thought sarcastically. But I kept my comments to myself. I stood up and walked over to the window. It was starting to get dark outside. The sky had turned an intense shade of deep blue in the throes of dusk. All the crepuscular animals had begun to stir, birds flitting back to their homes, deer moving about. I reached up to close the curtains. Something caught my eye. No. The caution tape I had so carefully strung across the trailhead had been torn in two. The closed sign lay on the ground. I squinted, my heart beginning to pound. It had been fine 20 minutes ago, after we cleared the parking lot. Maybe it was just a deer. Maybe a deer tripped over it and ripped it with its hooves. But as I stood there, staring out into the darkness, I saw something else. A shape, just at the tree line, on the other side of the parking lot. It didn't move. I squinted, but in the darkness, it could have been anything. An oddly shaped tree trunk, a fence post, a bush. Still, the way my eyes immediately snapped to it. I wondered if it wasn't there before, if it was someone standing there. I squinted. The door creaked open behind me. I turned around to see Miranda, Jackie, and Davis walking into the main room. Donnie stood up and began asking them about the bear attacks. I turned back to the window. My blood ran cold. The shape was no longer there. Those black bears are a lot more vicious than you think, Miranda was explaining to Donnie. Never get between a mother bear and her cubs. She'll tear you right to pieces. I had an uncle out in Fort Wayne. I closed the curtains, the metal rings screeching against the curtain rod. Then I turned back to the four of them, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm going to head to the bathroom, Donnie interrupted, slipping past them. Be right back. You still pay us for bathroom time, right? Like the clock's still running. Miranda rolled her eyes. Yes, Donnie. He disappeared into the back of the building, which gave me the perfect time to confront them. Miranda glanced at me, then continued towards the door. Jackie and Davis followed her. Without so much as a goodbye, she reached for the doorknob. Wait, you can't go out there. I saw something in the woods. The three of them exchanged looks. Miranda took her hand off the doorknob and turned toward me. What did you see? There was someone standing there, just at the tree line, and the caution tape is down, ripped in two. I glared at her. Are you going to tell me a bear did that? Or are you going to tell us what's really going on? She glanced between Jackie and Davis. Okay, fine. She sat down across from me and heaved a sigh. We think there's some sort of murderer on the loose. What? It only started happening a few months ago. This town, this park, they were always so safe. The worst incident we had in 5 years was when somebody had their dog off their leash and it bit someone. We had nothing. No weirdos, no bear attacks, nothing. But then, 3 months ago, Emily Johnson went missing. She disappeared after she went for a jog on the red trail. It was all over the news, especially because she was a pretty blonde 20-something. Missing white woman syndrome and all that. People had all kinds of theories. She was nabbed by some stalker, serial killer, or whatever. We had volunteer search parties combing the woods, park rangers combing the forest, all of that. We even had people leaving flowers and teddy bears along the red trail, where she disappeared, and that's when the next incident happened. Miranda hesitated, glancing more at Jackie than at Davis. One of these people, holding a vigil or whatever, disappeared. It was an older woman who'd known Emily as a student or something. She was just gone. There was no trace of her. We redoubled our search efforts, but we didn't find anything about her either. In the past 3 months, a total of 5 people have gone missing. All women, all from the red trail, never from any other trail. She grimaced. Then, one morning, while out on patrol, about a week after the second woman disappeared, Jackie found Emily's sneakers, and it was like your pictures of the hat and jacket. The shoes were placed next to each other, and the shoes were placed next to each other, and the shoelaces were tied in neat little bows. It was obviously staged, placed there for someone to find. That's horrible, I said. I can't even imagine. Well, it gets worse, Miranda replied, crossing her arms. A week later, we found Emily's necklace. In the ranger station, we changed all the locks, of course, and we had the police out here several times. They didn't find anything. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced back towards the window, but it was now too dark to see across the parking lot. I stood up and pulled the old curtains over the window, then returned to my seat. Clearly, this whole thing is a game to him, Jackie said. He enjoys seeing us afraid. I mean, if he had access to the ranger station at one point, he could have easily snuck up behind one of us and killed us. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted to scare us, watch us squirm, play with us like a cat plays with a mouse. It's going to eat. But the police are looking for him, right? Do they have any leads? I asked. The police. Miranda shook her head. Well, they're useless, basically. I mean, they're investigating. They've ruled out some guys, but they haven't actually nailed down anyone. No suspects, at least none that they've told us about. They keep telling us they're going to find him, but they never do. That's because it isn't him, David interrupted. Miranda rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, not this again. There are a few things we've seen with the case that don't make sense with what a human would do. A few weeks ago, I saw this silhouette several hundred yards through the trees. I started chasing it, but it moved too fast. Even Usain Bolt couldn't run that fast. Davis. And there's also the howling. We hear it only at night, around midnight. It sounds like this horrible blend between a woman screaming and a dog howling. "That's a northern screech owl, you idiot," Miranda snapped at him. "And it disrupts the electromagnetic field. If it's anywhere in range, your cell phone will cut out. That's why I make sure to always have a compass on me and not rely on GPS." "Wait," I glanced from Miranda to Davis. "You gave me a compass." "I don't believe him," she said, shaking her head. "I just think a compass is more reliable than a phone." But she sounded slightly uncertain when she said it, like she didn't believe him, but also wasn't ruling out the possibility that there was some cryptid running wild in the woods. "Look." Davis stood up and approached me, pulling out his phone. He flicked his finger over the screen and then handed it to me. "Look at that photo," he said. "You can't tell me there's something seriously fucked up going on here." I looked down at the screen. It was a grainy photo of the forest, zoomed in as far as the camera could go. Between two birch trees, there was a sliver of a dark shape. It was incredibly tall, maybe about 8 or 9 feet. The problem was, because the resolution was so terrible, and it was mostly obscured by the trees, you really couldn't tell what it was. It could be anything from a tree trunk to some random debris to a weird compression artifact. Cool photo," I told him. "I heard the howling noise at the same time," he replied, echoing through the forest. "I thought you only heard the howling at night," Miranda snapped at him. "Usually at night. Jackie's heard it during the day." Jackie shrank away, looking ashamed. "Well, I did see something out there," I told Davis. "It wasn't super tall, though. It looked like a person moving through the brush, wearing a light-colored shirt." "That's the whole point," Davis replied. "We're dealing with a skinwalker. This is its true form in the photo. It can change shape to imitate people. So what you saw was probably the skinwalker in the shape of someone else." Okay, now I could see why Miranda was so dismissive of Davis. He didn't think there was just something unexplainable in the woods. He thought it was specifically a shape-shifting skinwalker whose mere presence disrupted the electromagnetic fields around us, hiding out in this tiny state park in the middle of nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised if the next words out of his mouth were something like, "I saw him getting donuts at the Latham Bagel Shop." We sat there in awkward silence. I tried to think of something that wouldn't totally offend Davis, but also not egg him on. The last thing I needed was for everyone at this job to think I was some cryptid-believing cook like he was. "Can you go get Donnie?" Miranda asked, turning towards me. "It's been like 20 minutes." I guess so," I said, getting up. But as soon as I stepped out of the front room, I heard Miranda, Jackie, and Davis talking in hushed whispers. I lingered just outside the doorway for a moment and caught snatches of their conversation. "I can't tell him that. Do you really think?" I strained my ears. "Hurry up, Mark." Reluctantly, I walked down the hallway. No answer. I walked right up to the bathroom door. "Donnie, are you just playing on your phone?" Silence. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. It creaked open under my fist. My heart plummeted when I saw the lights were out. "Donnie," I called, my voice shaking. "You, here." My fingers fumbled along the wall, looking for the light switch. Click. I froze. Donnie lay on the floor. His shirt was drenched in blood, spilling out onto the tiles and seeping into the crevices. His eyes were closed. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because soon Miranda, Jackie, and Davis were stomping up the stairs. They ran in behind me. The world turned into a blur of color and noise as they rushed to help him, but I just stood there, frozen, my legs shaking underneath me. Because on the counter was Heather's purple hat, neatly folded next to the sink.